Welcome everybody. Please enter your identity and your personal or your colorado.edu email into the chat so I can make sure to send you follow-up resources. Again, right now, for those of you who have just joined, please enter your email and your identity into the chat, and I will get you some follow-up resources after the webinar. Looks like we have about 30 people with us today. I'm so glad you all are here. My name is Alaina Nickerson, and I'm in charge of graduate student career services. My little waiting room here is keeping us secure today, but also is requiring me to admit people. So just a few little housekeeping things as we get started. I believe everyone's been admitted at this point. Sure, I'll have a few people popping in. Yep, we've got one more coming in here. Okay, so that might be a little tricky for the first few minutes of our webinar. Excuse the bumbliness of all of this. You know, we're still getting used to doing all this stuff over our webinar formats here, but hopefully you'll find it helpful today to just be able to talk about this topic. So again, send me your questions that you're hoping to get answered today. I'm just going to do a little, I unfortunately don't have somebody to moderate with me and send me the questions, so I just kind of have to manage the chat and the admitting process here today. So one more time, hopefully, and maybe I'll just say this at the end as well. For anyone who has just joined us, please enter your identity and your email address so I can get follow-up resources to you. And I am going to go ahead and take another minute to look through your questions, make sure I have those jotted down. And we will get to some of these throughout the presentation. And I've also saved some time at the end for us to get to address any of these questions that are particularly pressing for you. Writing down a few of those. Thank you for sending your emails and your identities so I can make sure you get resources. I think we're set as far as our waiting room. No one else is waiting to join at the moment. Hopefully I can catch anybody who pops in here. Got a question about field-specific resources. Today we're going to be talking in more generalities for some exploration and ideas to get you started to find those field-specific resources. I'll let you know of any I know of in particular, and that's also something I'll follow up with you on if there are other things I can track down after the webinar. We have a question about the meeting going to mostly be about the Myers-Briggs test. We will not be talking about the Myers-Briggs test at all today. It is one of the assessments we offer, so I'm going to generally talk about some self-exploration questions or topics and resources to be thinking about, but Myers-Briggs is not a main focus of the webinar today. And then we've got a question about private industry versus nonprofit and public service industry jobs. Some of those will be, we're going to primarily use industry as a catch-all term for non-academic sectors. I can speak a little bit to some general differences between public service sectors, nonprofits, and private industry. One thing you're going to hear a lot from me today is, you know, the nuance of your particular background, as well as the needs of a particular sector and how they're shifting. And then we have the added layer of COVID stuff going on right now. There's a lot of nuance. And so there's going to be very few blanket resources that are going to be applicable to everyone. We're going to talk about a general framework and some tools to help you find the things that are most applicable to you. Let's see. We also have a question about how do you know if you need a PhD? Okay. I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to scan this instead of writing everything down. I'll go back through this at the end. And make sure I'm addressing all of this. But as things pop up, I think what I'll do, because we have people joining throughout, and I have some presentation to get through and resources to let you know about, I'm going to stop monitoring the chat for a moment, or for the majority of the workshop portion. Hopefully some of your questions will get answered through that, and then I'll come back to your questions towards the end of the session here today. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started in the presentation portion, and then we can address your individual questions if I didn't get to them in the main session here. Oh, these are great questions. Thank you for submitting them. We'll get to some important stuff here today. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, get us to our main framework here and get rolling. Okay. We'll get this in a presentation mode. All right. So I think we just had one other person join us at some point in our during our webinar today. Please enter your email address and your identity so I can get you follow-up information after this. I'm going to tell you about a lot of resources today, and I want to make sure you can find those easily. I also have a little packet to send you for this process to kind of help guide you through the process of it. So I'm hoping that I'm actually not sharing my presenter view with you, but it's hard to tell over this. So if it's a little messy, please forgive that. Okay, so I'm gonna move away from the chat box at the moment. Again, just one last time, please enter your information so I can send you follow-up resources. Okay, so now we've got, hopefully I can, okay, I think this is our actual presentation view here. So we'll get rolling now. My name is Alaina Nickerson. I run Graduate Student Career Services through our centralized office. I'm actually a part of the graduate school as well as the centralized career office, and I specialize in finding resources that are particularly helpful for you. You know, developing. We have a team that is focused on creating resources for you and making sure you are getting the information that's really most meaningful to graduate students. So one of the questions I hear a lot from from our graduate student population and postdoc population is how do we go about figuring out where we fit in industry? One thing that is true across the board now, we have people in this webinar from humanities, social sciences, bench sciences, natural sciences, engineering. We have a broad swath of folks to consider for this particular presentation. So I'm not going to focus in on particular industries too much in this session, but I want to make sure that you are considering the different elements that you need to as you make your choices and where you find find your particular fit in industry. And again, as I mentioned before, I'm using the term industry as kind of a catch-all for those fields that are non-academic fields. So if I talk about something that's specific to government or public service or something that's specific to nonprofit, I'll try to make that clear, that that's referring to those fields in particular. But most of the time we're talking about industry, private sector types of things. But I also have a mind to a lot of the things that grad students tend to be interested in pursuing are things that are related to government, related to public sector. So I'll try to make sure that it's clear what I'm talking about, or if I'm just talking in generalities, it's usually helpful for all fields outside of academia. One thing to also recognize when you are thinking about making this transition into industry is your framework and how you've thought about the job search is really something that has to shift as you are moving outside of academia. Academia is a very lockstep process. It has specific hiring cycles. It has very clear hierarchies. Your education is really at the foremost, and your particular field expertise is really at the forefront as you are considering what you want to do next. As you move outside of academia, your particular science or humanity or whatever your field is takes a back seat primarily for some of those. So there's a lot more that you have to consider as you think about where you want to end up in industry. Let's go through what we're going to cover today, and then we'll get rolling in terms of some of the tools that will help you and the framework that is helpful to think about as you're considering how to move through this process of decision making and figuring out where you fit in industry. So our agenda today, we will be obviously, I wanted you to sign in, as I said about a dozen times, so sorry for those of you who joined early. But I want to gather questions on the front end, make sure we're addressing some things through our presentation, and then as questions pop up throughout the session, again, I'm not going to be monitoring the chat function throughout the session today, but I'll be revisiting that to make sure we either address your specific questions in session, or I'm able to pull some resources and send those along to the group when I send the follow-up email afterwards today. So I want to introduce to you a career exploration framework that really helps you understand the different parts that need to go into this. And some of these are typically kind of skipped over with the grad student population in particular. And for those of you who have been in postdocs for a while, it could be stuff that you've not considered either. I do want to recognize that we are all coming to this process from different places as well. So you could have done some of this pre-work ahead of time, and that's fantastic. We really come from different levels of experience, different levels of introspection in terms of these questions to begin with. But I want to make sure that everyone's aware of each of these pieces so you can plug yourself into the places that are really will be important for you to be identifying and getting clear on where you stand, what you bring, and the resources that are available to you in each of those stages. So we'll talk about the framework, and we'll keep coming back to that as we go through the different steps here. I want to share some tools to help with each of those steps. Make sure you know about resources and services that are available to you through career services for each of this. So we have our big group, you know, kind of a widespread kind of group session today. So, you know, those are obviously for the purpose of this type of service that you need to stay fairly broad. But we do have individual sessions that are available for you to talk about those really specific questions you have related to your field as well. So I want to make sure you know about that stuff. And then, like I said, we'll go through some questions at the end here that you've submitted. So here's our framework that we're going to be working with today. It's called a career diamond. And what I really want you to see by using this model is that your options will widen. So if you take a look at, you know, just the process that's happening here, your options are widening at the front end. You'll start to understand that there are a lot of different places you can plug in. You're gathering information about yourself. So the expanding self-awareness, somebody had a question about, you know, will this be focused on Myers-Briggs before? I think that's, you know, a piece of a kind of a nod to some of the exploration, as personal exploration that needs to happen as you consider a choice in career. But also there's much more that you might be thinking about and gaining knowledge about yourself in terms of this exploration process. But then there's also this big piece that I think is really key to where you are in your process, most of you at least. And again, recognizing you're coming at starting this at different points in the process. But that idea of an expanding information in terms of occupations in the world of work. So those things will kind of expand in terms of the information you have and what you need to be identifying. And then as you kind of you reach a critical point there, you need to start incorporating information that is narrowing down your options and making it a reasonable amount of information that you're dealing with. And let's see here. And then you get to a point where you actually make that decision and you enter the job search at that point. I think actually I did see somebody say that you're seeing my presenter mode, not the main slides. Did we get past that? We see the presenter view.
It is in the presenter view. So.
It is the presenter view. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, display settings. Let me see if I can. Is that looking better?
Yep, I can see the slideshow now. Thanks.
Okay, so sorry. All right, thank you. Glad I checked the comments there for a second. Okay, so that career diamond model. So that's our basic framework we're going through now. Okay. So in terms of self-awareness, this is some of the self-exploration that you may or may not have had time to do at this point in your educational path and your career exploration in general. There are several areas here that you may not have thought about before, so I want to kind of break that down a little bit and talk about these different areas you might want to be exploring or getting some clarity in as you enter this process. Because the reason I don't mean to harp on this area at all. The reason we include this is this helps with making really clear decisions on the back end of this, because what we find is, you know, people tend to come into this process with the mindset that, you know, what am I marketable for? And, how do I make use of this education that I have? Both very important questions, but they're not the only questions to be asking. Because as we think about career, finding a meaningful career outside of academia, you have to think about who you are and what you bring to the process beyond just what your education has provided in you, but also what are you drawn to personally, and what long-term are you going to be satisfied doing. So the idea of expanding self-awareness is really identifying some of these areas and getting clarity and prioritizing different elements of these areas that are going to be important for you to really choose something that's going to be that fits well with who you are. So some of you may be looking at transitioning outside of academia. We know, let's put it on the table now. We know the academic market is a tough one right now. And we don't see a lot of signs that that's going to cease to be the case, just with funding issues in higher ed and things like that. So I know a lot of you are in this session just as kind of a backup if your academic plans aren't working. But I think there are also a good portion of you, and we see it a lot in career services, that have recognized throughout your graduate schooling that that academia maybe isn't your first choice. Maybe it never was, maybe it has changed. But it is a reality that your first choice is to move outside of this arena. And some of that has to do with personality. Some of that has to do with values and what you find your interests are in work. And maybe you're finding throughout your graduate process or your postdoc process that the work you're doing it's not providing all that you need it to in terms of working on things you're interested in. Or the work you're doing not lining up with values you have. So if you don't have clarity in those areas, it's really hard to understand what's going to be a better fit later on. So that's why we talk about, this self-exploration portion of the framework. So there are tools to help get some clarity in these things. So I'll just go down the list here. Values. We have some tools to help you get clear on what your workplace values may be and what those top priorities are for you. We have things called we have card sorts that focus both. We actually in several different areas. We have card sorts that allow you to look into specific. Well, they're called motivated skills card sorts. So they're related to skills. We have a card sort around values. We have a card sort around even your interests in terms of challenges you want to solve in your work. And we have access to some of those actually remotely. So some of that can be things that you can work on your own. And I'll provide links to that in the follow-up resources. We also have, just in terms of resources in like individual exploration, we can address some of these questions you may have in terms of prioritizing interests and values and skills you want to be using in individual appointments, where you can discuss some of those. We can do some activities within the individual session. If you're interested in personality traits and how that might be playing into your choice in the workplace, then we do have some assessments that are related to that. We have assessments that are related to, actually we have a skill and aptitude assessment. We have an interest assessment related to careers. Personality is the Myers-Briggs. The interest is the strong interest inventory. Aptitude is our U-Science test that you can access for free. So we do have assessments that cover a number of these things as well. Some of you, this is not, you already know these things, you have your priorities set out, and that's great. for those of you who have not really ever looked at this stuff, it could be a good place for you to start exploring, you know, what are your major priorities in terms of values, interests, skills, personality, stuff like that. If you find that your energy is taxed in the current environment you're in, that could be a lot of times that's related to values and personality. If you are working alone a lot and you're missing being around people and that sapping energy, that could be a personality related thing. And those are things that are important to consider as you're thinking about the environments you're choosing to work in, and the particular roles and how much people interaction that has. You know, some of you may be on the flip side of that, and you're having to communicate way more than your personality, you know, might be built for. A couple of things that I do want to focus on as well. Most of you are highly focused on what your educational background is. And like I said, in academia, that's of primary importance. That is your selling point in any particular role. Educational background is important because it actually, what I will say here is, as you start to think about non-academic roles, your educational background becomes important in what skills it has provided you. So as you're starting to think about what you have to bring to the workplace, you have to focus on skills rather than knowledge for the most part. If you are going into a field that is highly research-based, if you are going into a field that is highly related to the specific field knowledge you've been gaining, that's a different case. But for the most part, as you're making a transition, you're hinging that decision on your skill sets and what you want to be focusing on in your work, those skills that you want to be using, and kind of leaving, as we think about transitioning in your career, it's these small pivots or large pivots you're making closer to what you want to be spending your time on, and away from the things that you don't want to be spending your time on. So it's much more to do with skills. Ooh, I had a question pop up about hard skills. So do I mean hard skills? I think both. So what we're moving away from the ideas of hard skills and soft skills, just in terms of, you know, the value placed on each, and that soft might be seen as less important. So I like to talk about them in terms of technical skills and human skills, things that are related to, you know, what you're doing as well as how you're doing those things. Skills in general. So back to your question in terms of hard skills, you have to take inventory of both what you can do and then also how you do that. The way you communicate, the way you approach problems and problem solve. And you have to take stock of what are your technical skills? You know, what are the skills that you want to be bringing into your workplace? If you really want to bring your lab skills into your future work, but you don't want to do it in academia, then you're looking at fields like R&D. You're looking at, you know, if you're more the qualitative research skills, then you might be looking at market research. You might be looking at policy. For both, you know, scientific backgrounds and humanities backgrounds, we have fellowships that are related to government work that you might be considering. And then, you know, if you really love research and you want to be kind of synthesizing that research and communicating about it, then policy roles are a huge area to be looking at. So, but yes, skills across the board. So something that isn't really in my, I don't have a slide for it in the presentation, but you might want to take some notes around, is a process for deconstructing your experience and really starting to think about what skills you've been gaining through your experience. So let's take, for example, a research assistant role that you've been in. And as we all know, for anybody who has held a particular position, we have several responsibilities within each of those positions. So what you want to start to do is take each of your major roles you've held, okay? within academia, outside of academia. And actually, before I get too far into that, let me just finish this list here so we can move on after I'm done here and I don't get too sidetracked. The work and leisure experience, the thing I would say about that is it's not just about what you've been studying in academia. Although if you've spent the majority of your time in academia and you don't have a lot of like work experience outside of academia, that's okay. And I would also argue that you do have work experience. It's just been in a particular sector. But I would, particularly in terms of the self-awareness, I would pay attention as you're thinking about this transition and what's important for you to be considering as you are making this choice. What are you naturally drawn to as a human? You know, what are the things that you have developed hobbies around? What are things that you've pursued in the past? And maybe even you haven't had time to be doing that now as you've been going through a grad program or in a postdoc, but what are the things that you are naturally drawn to? This is a chance as you make a transition to industry to start considering that stuff more, to start taking it seriously. What are things that are just natural for you to want to be working on? Okay, so getting through that list and going back to this exercise for identifying some of the skills that you may have picked up along the way. One thing that I find is very, very important is to do this process of deconstructing roles and responsibilities. So you want to kind of start making lists from this. So list out the roles you've had. Pick a robust role you've had and list out the responsibilities within that role. Now, that's not getting to your skills yet. Another layer of deconstruction is for each responsibility there. What skills needed to be employed or built to do that responsibility? So let's take, for example, let's take, for example, your research, a research assistant position. So if you have been working in a position like that, then you probably have done some lab related logistics work. Maybe you have done inventory and you have, maybe you are in charge of a cohort of undergrad researchers. So you're doing some management. Maybe you're doing some training as a result of supervisory responsibilities. Maybe, and then in that training, maybe you have some hard skills in terms of software you know how to use. Obviously, you've got hard skills like lab related hard skills. So what are them? Take stock of the processes you know how to do, the machines you know how to use or fix, or both. If you are creating, some of you have patents around processes you've developed. What are the things, and what went into getting a patent? You know, where did you need to, what research needed to happen there? What collaboration needed to happen there? If you needed resources that your lab didn't have access to, how did you collaborate with other labs or communicate about needs in order to get those, get time on certain machines or in certain programs? There's a lot that goes into even one responsibility within a particular role. So you need to start breaking that down and making lists of both those people related skills as well as technical or process specific. So maybe you're not in tech, maybe you're not in the lab, but maybe you have specific research skills related to qualitative research, related to interviewing, related to grant writing, you know, different things like that. So take stock of all of that. And what I would encourage you to be doing at that point is to be thinking about what are those skills you loved using versus what are those skills you may have been good at and you got accolades for doing it, but you hated the process of. And maybe this is the point as you start to consider where you're going to land in industry. This is the point where you start moving away from the things that you really hated doing. You just had to do as part of these roles. that's the freedom that comes with some of this, is that, you know, the world is your oyster at this point. You know, outside of academia, you're not locked into the things that you've had to do here. You can start focusing on the things you love doing. So we have a question too, in terms of how I recommend quantifying that experience. So I think quantifying that experience comes in terms of creating your documents, your application documents, you know, whether that be, actually, I'm going to make a note for myself. I'm also going to include in your follow-up resources a CVs to resumes guide. That will help, you know, that'll start the process of getting your written materials together for application. But really, in terms of what we're talking about today, that's much further down the road in the process. But in general, as you try to quantify those, you know, you want to be thinking about value add. What did this do? Did this make a process faster? Did it make it more efficient? Did you, were you able to deal with more data as a result of what you did? If you were working with people, did you increase efficiency? Did you, what were numbers of your teams? You know, were you in charge of 6 undergrad researchers? Did you, one of the like easily quantifiable things, but maybe not as relevant depending on the role you're applying to, is how many publications you had. I know that's a little soul crushing to hear. I don't mean to do that at this point, but not at any point. I don't want to crush your soul at any point. But some of those things that are really, that you can quantify are the size of teams you've worked with, the number of projects you've done, that sort of thing. So we can, I'm happy to talk more about that either offline or in a different session. But more now is more the large picture, looking at how do you take stock in general of what you're bringing, and then you can get into the nuance of how to communicate that to people a little bit later. All right, moving along. So, and I also have some resources for you as you start to take stock of, you know, these self-awareness pieces. I've got some worksheets and stuff that you can work with to help move through those, and I'll be sending those to you as well. Okay. So questions to ask yourself as you're looking at, you know, this self-exploration piece, is, you know, as you look at those different categories of information you need to have your priorities clear on, where are you clear, and where are some areas that maybe you need to do some work around and you need to dig in a little bit more to understand what you really want and need? Do you have a clear list of the skill sets you can offer in your future work? I think that's a key component of this, is really digging into those skills. And you'll have a sense for yourself in terms of, you know, where are you wanting to lean most heavily? Do you want to lean most heavily on your technical skills? Do you want to lean most heavily on your people skills and that interpersonal interaction and the communication side of things? What type of work environments appeal to you? I mentioned before, this has to do with personality. But, you know, do you want to do a majority of your work on teams? Do you want to do it individually? Those are things that you might want to be considering as you're exploring the world of work. And I think that, you know, and that will be our next step, of kind of looking at what's available. And then there's this idea of career pain. So I read a long time ago, I read an article that I found really compelling, where the author was talking about, you know, we tell people so much, you know, pursue the things you love to do. And the reality of the world of work is that people get paid to do certain things because there's parts of it that suck, you know, in every single career. So what might even be more illuminating for you to think about, and this is just one question among many, but what types of career pain might impact you the least? Which ones do you not care all that much about? I've given some examples here in this question in terms of career pain. Do you really get bugged by a slow pace, or is it really stressful for you to be working at a fast pace? That would really, you know, that that will help you to decide what types of environments you might need to be in. Are you compelled by competition, or do you really need a collaborative work environment? Do you feel like you have skills to navigate relationships and politics in the workplace? I mean, nobody really loves politics, but does that bug you to the point where, you know, you would quit somewhere that you had to deal with that sort of stuff? Or is it not that big of a deal and you can navigate that pretty easily? So just think about the things that are easiest for you to deal with as an individual, and that's going to be really personal to you. And that will help you get some clarity on the things that are just not options, because it's a totally different atmosphere than what you want to deal with. And those places where, you know, some of that, this is why I'm paid to do this sort of stuff, would not be that painful for you. I saw a chat pop up and now I can't find it again. So I'm sorry if I'm missing something. I'll try to circle back around to that when we do our Q&A session. So I want to make sure that you have clear tools to help with any of this. Here we go. Come on. The chat just popped up again. Oops. Going back there. Sorry about that. I lost it again. My mouse seems to like to just be in our presentation and not necessarily. Let me go back to the chat for some reason. So sorry about that. I will try to answer that when I can get back to the screen where I can access it. Sorry. Okay, so let's move along. So some tools to help here. Our assessments, I talked about those a minute ago, so I won't spend a ton of time on that. We also have card sorts. I want you to know about a couple PhD level specific tools for you to be aware of. You can access this through our online resource library on the Career Services webpage. I'll try to link out to each of these as well. Imagine PhD as an exploration tool that has some self-exploration pieces as well as workplace exploration tools on it. This is specifically for humanities and social sciences. They built this tool because the majority of grad level career help tends to be focused in STEM, which we have a huge population of at CU Boulder. So I imagine the majority of you are in STEM fields, but for those of you who are not, this is a resource you may be interested in looking at, because they really focus on areas that are relevant to you, where the majority of those resources, like I said, are kind of STEM focused. Particularly, and these tools have, like I said, some various functions within them. So I'm specifically talking just in this portion of the webinar about self-exploration tools, and both Imagine PhD as well as Versatile PhD have some options for you there. Versatile PhD gives some great insight into workplace kind of pathing, career pathing, in terms of where you might end up in industry with a PhD. I would also say for those of you with master's degrees, these resources might be helpful for you as well, depending on what level, you know, what kind of expertise you built through your program. But Versatile PhD has an option called, or a tool called Options for Success, and that's actually a full career exploration course that has been developed for PhDs specifically. So it might be something, if you do find yourself in a place where you need to do some self-exploration and you want to go through you know, a really structured process for doing that, then just know that the Options for Success course is available to you. Oh God, we've got a chat here. Let me see if I can get back to our chat. I'm sorry, this is, got back to my presenter view. I'm sorry, but I want to try to get to your chat as well. apologize for my my choppy Zoom skills here. Okay. And then we also have a question. Okay, so just some rewording of questions for the Q&A. So I'll get back to our PowerPoint here. So we're doing okay there. Okay, so back, do we have the, are you looking at my presenter view again? Somebody let me know. Okay, cool. All right, so back to our presentation here. So we're going back to our framework. So we've talked about that expanding self-awareness. And again, I'll have some resources for you to kind of keep track of some of that research you're doing on yourself. And then in this expansion part of our career diamond here, we need to get more information about occupations and the workplace and where to find what are options out there. So I want to make sure that you know about some resources that are available to you there. Come on. Okay. So in terms of finding information, I do think it's important to start with what you have gotten a sense for what you might be marketable for. Everybody's got an idea or two, and that's a place to, and if you don't, that's okay as well. Let's have a private discussion and we can start getting some ideas on the table. But I do think just going with what you have is a good starting place in terms of fields you have been considering. Because what I do find with the grad population I work with is that people are kind of playing around with ideas but have done very little research into those to decide if that's really a good fit for them. So you do need to start digging in here and getting to some really helpful resources that might help you start really finding out what the day-to-day looks like there. And I'll be specific about what those tools are in a minute. One common issue that I find pop up is that also people tend to have some assumptions about the fields they're considering that are either based in the academic realm, and you're applying how hiring works or how expertise is leveraged in industry in the same way that you would in academia, and recognize that these sectors are very, very different in terms of how the importance they place on different elements of what you bring to the job, to the application, basically. You know, your education is paramount, your field expertise is paramount in academia and industry. Like I said before, it comes back to the skills you're bringing to that field and your expressed interest in what they're doing and your ability to draw that connection between what you can bring, basically coming at it with this question of how can I help? Where do I see myself helping the effort that you're doing here? Having an idea and building that bridge for employers is really important. So back to this initial thought of what sources are you using for information? If you are writing an opportunity or an option off simply because you know someone who it worked a certain way for them, or it didn't work out for them, I would say we need to look at your sources a little bit more. We need to dig into current, relevant information, accurate information about how the field works now, rather than somebody's experience from a few years ago, a few decades ago. And if your information is coming from people who have not been successfully employed in that area, then that's something that I would say, let's go to the source and make sure you're getting that accurate information before you write an opportunity off or an option off. As far as tools, so where do we get our accurate information? There are a few tools to know about in terms of exploring options in industry. Again, industry can incorporate nonprofit work. It can incorporate government work as well. So a few resources to know about there. Vault.com is one of my favorites because it offers some specific tools that allow you to do some filtering of options in it. Vault allows you to kind of browse through different occupational information based on your education level, your salary needs, your interests, things like that. So I think it can be a really useful filtering through a lot of different unrelated options that you may run into without an ability to filter. They do offer very robust industry guides as well. And it's not for every industry, but for some top fields of interest, they do have these, over 100-page industry guides where they take you from an overall overview of the industry and different subcategories within that, through the whole hiring process, related fields, things like that. So I think that can be a really interesting and helpful tool. They give you occupation outlines and related occupations. You can find similar information on this to onetonline.org. That's that first option there. And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics, their Occupational Outlook Handbook is the second link there that I've identified. And again, I'll provide all of this in our follow-up email from this webinar. But this is a good place to get a good overview and some specific tips in terms of entry, educational or certifications that might be needed in certain fields. And I think also related occupations can be a really helpful tool that all of these provide to help you, if one doesn't look particularly right, maybe you can pivot to something really related to that. Also, I will let you know that actually I'll get down to another tool I want to tell you about at the end of the list here. Versatile PhD and Imagine PhD, again, for this particular function of exploring the workplace, Versatile PhD has some really cool research for you in terms of letting you know, here's a PhD that came from this particular field in academia. This is where they went in industry. So maybe molecular biologist went into industry like R&D or data science or something like that. What they do is they give you these they're kind of packages where they give you a whole narrative of from the job seeker, basically, who was successfully hired into this field. So they vary a little bit in what they give you, but essentially what they'll do is they'll give you a narrative of what their job search process looked like, how they found this opportunity, what helped them get an opportunity to interview or things like that, different networking things they tried, stuff like that. So the narrative of how it went, the job posting that they went for, usually what their CV looked like in academia, and then what their industry resume ended up looking like. So you can really get a sense for, how they altered their documents to be more marketable online. So that's some really interesting stuff. But for this particular topic, in terms of exploring different fields, it can help give you an idea of what made people marketable and what they really leaned on, and what the job posting might actually look like in certain fields. So I think just even playing around and looking at that resource can be helpful. They have options both for STEM fields as well as humanities and social sciences. So all of these, Vault, Versatile, and Versatile PhD at this point, those are subscription-based resources you can access through signing into Handshake, which is our job and internship portal through Career Services. And you have, that will basically allow you to do the, sign in with your identity and verify your affiliation with the university. And then that'll give you premium access to some of those tools. So Vault is one that you have to access through Handshake initially, Versatile PhD as well. Imagine PhD is free, ONET Online is free, BLS is free. The next resource here, IBIS World, is overall industry research. This can help give you an idea of supply chains and related industries to something you might be working on. Another place, and IBIS World is also a subscription that we have through university libraries. So I'll give you a link to that as well so you can access that. Association search. So what I mean by this is you've got your academic associations you're related to, and most of the, well, it varies. Some are very academic and you'll have a sense for that, I'm sure, based on your field. And some are more professionally situated, and there are connections between associations. What I would say is one of the most effective and fruitful searches you can start is by going to the core of your field. And your associations for your fields are that core. It's the hub where people who are connected to this particular field they're connecting in conferences, they're connecting around resources and information. So look up the professional associations that are related to your field and start to get a sense, play around on their website. Sometimes they have job boards related, just right on there. I would say because they're not big aggregators like we're used to seeing, they don't have the number of postings that you might be used to seeing. So they are usually a little smaller, but they're very niche and they could be really related to what you're looking for. Some don't have a job board, and that's okay, but they can still be useful even without those career resources. Look at the membership. Look at kind of, sometimes they'll give you an idea of the various industries or kind of sub-specializations within a larger association framework. And that can give you these places to then branch your search out from there in terms of opportunities you might be interested in related to your core field. That can be such a fruitful place to start, and it's something that I find people don't necessarily think about right away. So I would say that's a key one to start looking at as well. Something, even though it's at the end of the list and is not it's not one of the first things I talked about, but it is absolutely probably my favorite way to go about gathering this information, because it comes from very current, very relevant resources, is the process of informational interviewing with either alumni from your alma maters or from CU Boulder, as well as from other schools you've attended. This allows you to talk one-on-one to get your questions answered. This is not a job interview. This is a process of contacting somebody who's working in an interesting field for you, whether it be the field, whether it's their particular position. It allows you to reach out to people who are working currently and have been successful in the job search in these particular fields, and get their take on what's happening in the field, what makes people marketable in the job search. It can be really individualized to what's important to you in terms of questions. So because this is not a job interview, you can be really candid. You can get information on, what should I expect in terms of a starting salary in this field? if I'm entering, do people who hold PhDs enter at a different point in this field than people with bachelor's degrees? Depending on the field, you could need to enter at the same entry point that someone with a bachelor's degree might. But what we see is people with graduate degrees tend to shoot up the ladder a lot quicker. They get promotions faster once you are able to show what you can do in a particular company or in a particular sector, and use those specialized skills you've developed through your academic career. You have more mobility within the field. For other fields, you would enter at a completely different point. You kind of skip the entry-level positions altogether. That happens a lot with grad degrees, so that may be something that, and it totally depends on the industry you're going for or the company's hiring practices. So it could even be different within different sectors or different industries. So you need to know that kind of information by talking to somebody who's in the field and who's navigated that themselves. So I do want to show you, we'll go to the next slide just really quickly. So I can show you a tool that might be, where you can find some contacts for these informational interviews. Come on, there we go. Okay, so this screen here is the CU Boulder LinkedIn page. So one thing that you should be doing as you explore industry is creating a LinkedIn profile for yourself so you can do some outreach over LinkedIn. You go just search in this upper, search at the top of the screen in the search bar, search for University of Colorado Boulder. That's how I got here. Now look at the left-hand side of the screen, and 1, 2, 3, 4 options down on that left-hand menu is alumni. You click on that alumni button and it will take you to all CU Boulder alumni, and you can cross-reference, you can search and filter alumni by field they came from. So if you want to, specify a department, if you know some companies you're interested in working for and you want to see if there are any alums either from CU Boulder or from other schools you've attended who are working at those companies, you can search by company, you can search by certain skill set, you can search by region, so you can do some cross-referencing or cross-filtering of different elements, and you can find alumni who are positioned, in those companies. You can both, and I think this is helpful for 2 reasons. One, primarily why I'm talking about it right now is it can be a way to find alumni to reach out to and connect with for informational interviews. The other way you can use it is you can search, say, folks with, let's say English background, alumni of CU Boulder, working in the Philadelphia area, living in the Philadelphia area. So you're, you can search, find who from your alumni network is working there, or you can even leave your search broader than that. See what people are doing. So even just filter by your educational background or your field, and read through their profiles. See how their career path has gone. Where did they start? What companies did they work for? This can give you some really key information about where people are going from your department in particular. And then even beyond that, then it gives you that personal, that warm connection that, hey, we both went to the same school. I'm curious about learning about your field. Would you be willing to connect over a few questions, over email or Zoom or whatever you want to do in this particular climate we're in right now. So I want to move along, I'm just going to check time here. Yeah, I want to move along to make sure you know about some other resources we have. So there's a point in this process where you really start to want to connect, then this is probably key for a lot of you, connect with, the skills you're holding and where that might fit in industry. This is a little table that can kind of show you where those can intersect. So if you've done a lot of teaching in your degree, if you're looking at business and finance, it might look like sales training and development. Or training and development is kind of the idea of, it's their internal training for employees. And that's a huge place in industry that if you really like teaching, you might want to start looking at opportunities to do some training in the private sector. Looking at media, education, nonprofit, public policy, different areas that you can employ a lot of the different skills you've gotten through your grad degree. So this is just some basic ideas to start. I will provide this, don't worry, again, I will be providing these resources in my follow-up email, so I'll send you a copy of this. But a place to start. So where do your skills and industry intersect here? Can I say more about what this is again? So this, so just to recap, this table allows you, so on the left-hand side here, you're looking at skills that you may have gained through your grad degree. So research, teaching, writing and communication, administration and management, problem solving, people skills, all those types of things. You would identify these things that you would, which skills you would say you possess. And then along the top here, we have different sectors those might be employed in. And then the boxes under those would be some ideas for different types of work that you might do in these different sectors based on the skill sets that you've gained now through your grad degree, where that might be used in those different sectors. This is obviously not comprehensive, but it's a good place to start and to start thinking about different types of work you might want to be looking into more. Okay, back to our model. So we've gotten, so we're in this expansion phase now. You're looking at all of these concepts about yourself. You're looking at all of this information using these tools I've just outlined to expand your awareness. One other thing, I was going to go back to this slide after LinkedIn. So the tool spotlight down at the very bottom of this slide. Career One Stop is a resource that has a lot of neat tools on it to really start exploring your next step in your career. This is a government resource, so it's pretty expansive. But particularly, I'm wanting to highlight for you the Skills Matcher tool. So once you start to get this idea of the skills you want to be using and your level, this actually allows you to specify what, it kind of has a rubric on it for you to understand, am I, beginner level skills, intermediate, advanced, expert level skills in these particular areas. It has kind of a quiz type of thing for you to go through. And based on your skill set or your level of ability in these different types of skills, it will give you some suggestions for different types of work you might be interested in pursuing. So I wanted to highlight that Skills Matcher tool on Career One Stop. Again, I'll link to it in the resources I'll be providing, so you can kind of get a beginning place to start your research. Okay, moving along. So now in the narrowing part of this diamond, so applying your self-concept. So you've taken stock of what you have to offer, what's important to you and what you need. And I don't want to get too far past, talking about those personal elements without, recognizing that your self-concept also includes other people. You may have significant others, you may have kids, you may have responsibilities outside of what you're doing in work that affect what is possible to pursue. Maybe you have a region you need to live in. Maybe you have, maybe you have a disability that you need accommodation for, that would be affecting affecting what types of work you want to be pursuing. So there is this element of narrowing now in our model, that you need to start thinking about those personal elements for you, even financial realities, that will help narrow down the options you're looking at. So this is actually, for most people, the more comforting part of this process is the like, let's get this down to a more manageable area. So what are those personal elements that you need to consider in terms of what you can reasonably do for work later? Questions to ask yourself. I'll provide all of this in our resources, but do you have relationships or responsibilities that are central to your career choice? Are there particular needs you need to be considering? Are there other people whose input you need to gather as you get further into this? I've found that with certain clients, you know, they have a lot of, they need a lot more clarity than what they're able to get at this point. And sometimes that has to do with, you're making assumptions about what a partner might need, what a family member might need. And sometimes those are conversations you need to start having at this point in order to really get down to realities and where you need to be steering in your career. And that's, you know, all of those are, I mean, as many people are in this, there's another 1,000 options that you could be looking at for each of those. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time there. Back to our career diamond model, I do want to get to talking about some specifics about what's happening in the world of work right now, just to give you some insight there. It's in what we know. There's a lot of other stuff. So integrating occupational information. So narrowing your options based on market realities and what's happening right now and what you're finding out about particular occupations in your research. So questions to ask yourself. Have you dug into research? Researching particular fields and as you have dug into those, looking into positions more, which ones are feeling more realistic to you? Which ones are feeling most interesting? Which ones are feeling less interesting? These are questions at this stage as you've started to do this, the expansive gathering of information. Which things are kind of naturally being weeded out through what you're finding out about them? Also, a reality of considering different elements of the market are, you know, what waves are available to ride right now in the current climate? Where do you need to start getting creative? Where do you need to start being resourceful and strategic in how you're applying the skills you are using to the world of work? And that means being informed about what's happening in the world of work right now. We know right now in Colorado, that our hospitality and tourism industry, well, not just Colorado, I would say across the world, hospitality and tourism is really taking a hit. Any of the sectors that rely on in-person use of a service or product are really being hit right now. So so this can be, depending on how you look at it, it can be really scary, you know. Oil and gas also, because of Saudi Arabia and Russia's the trade war that's happening right now. Oil and gas is dismal at the moment. So because of, and this is it's kind of extreme right now, but these are realities that at any point in your job search, at any point in what's happening in culture and history and in the world and global economics, you have to be considering what is swelling and what is kind of fading at any moment. And a lot of that is, if you just take some time to think through it, it's kind of intuitive. A lot of our tech companies that are enabling remote work are booming right now. Transportation and logistics are booming right now. So there are these waves to ride at any particular moment in the marketplace. So those are things to be thinking about as you're considering where would be a strategic place for me to enter the market at this point. You know, in government, there are people who, you know, are looking at our different departments that may or may not be funded more readily based on the administration. So those are things to just take into account, consider the timing on, and adjust your plans or what you're thinking about according to, what's going to really help you make a well-positioned decision, and enter in a place that could be needing your help right now. What other insights do you have about booming industries? What sources of news can you trust when it comes to that? Great question, Alan. Let's talk about some of what we know right now. Coronavirus and how this is affecting things. Right now, Career Services is polling our employers. We are currently in this poll. So I only have, the most recent information I have is sort of mid-poll, but I can give you that information at the moment. So we've heard from 114 employers at this point. Most are currently in flux and are making decisions. So, a lot of our questions were around, are you stopping hiring? Are you seeing more internships or jobs in particular areas? That sort of thing. What we're seeing be affected most right now is a lot of current students, and this, is driven mostly by undergrads, but grad students they're interested in internships as well. But, internships is a hot topic at this point. Internships are being less impacted than entry-level hiring. That's actually good news for grad students because most of you are not entering at an entry level, like a traditional entry level that is kind of the broad swath hiring, the pipelines that tend to come from internships, those types of things. Entry-level hiring is being impacted right now by coronavirus, and not so much necessarily the social distancing. What we're seeing is that industry is companies are trying to project hiring needs or freezes based on a recession. So it's much more about a marketplace that's in a recession versus our social distancing needs, but that's, our recession is being fed by coronavirus. So it's all obviously the economy is affected in different ways by different elements of this. But what we are seeing is that the broad swath hiring of entry-level, big groups of entry-level candidates, those are the things that are most slowing right now. As companies are kind of contracting in relation to preparation for our recession that's happened in a month, basically. The reality of what we're dealing with now, and it must be recognized that anyone who's alive and working right now has not been through something like this, obviously, in their lifetime. So companies are responding, but it's hour by hour, it's day by day, keeping an eye on what's happening is important. Actually, the business school has, Richard Wobekind is a professor of economics. Economics is an A&S. So maybe business economics. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He works for for Leeds, and he does workshops on Colorado economy every year. And has been doing some recent ones. I'll include some links there. I find that information to be really trustworthy. I do think it's important to look at some of these resources. I tend to trust LinkedIn's information they're putting out. They have a resource called Who's Hiring Right Now. So that's all based on job postings that are going on LinkedIn. That's one of our major aggregates. It's one of the biggest, probably the main place that recruiters are active, as it's our biggest hub where they're active. So I think getting more connected to LinkedIn and resources there is important. Anything that they have a hiring now hashtag that recruiters are using a lot. So you can search that hashtag on LinkedIn. And I think that's an important place to kind of get some information about who's doing, you know, some of these swelling industries and big needs in industry right now. So that's good. One thing I would say is we are watching some crowdsourced listings of what companies are doing, and that's really based on individuals' experiences. If they're getting positions, if positions are rescinded or internships are rescinded, there are some individuals and companies that have taken it upon themselves to kind of create hubs of this. So those are really helpful, but they are places to start. So obviously in this slide, I'm making it really, you know, in probably a half a dozen different ways. I tell you, this is not a comprehensive resource to use, but it's a place to start getting some information about what's happening with particular companies. And I think that, so what you need to do there is, if you do go and look for a company in particular, the helpful thing is these resources are alphabetized, so you can easily find if they have any information about a particular company you're interested in. But then I would go to the company's website. So, you know, this is obviously more, it's less high level, but it's more specific. If you're interested in what's happening with particular companies, their website is going to be the most trustworthy place to go to find out about what's happening there in particular. So that's some basic information about what's happening now. I just want to check our time again. Okay, so we have under 10 minutes left. So I want to get to your questions in particular. So I want to kind of move on from this. Okay, so just organizing your plan. Some questions there. I'm going to kind of skip past this. This is stuff, I'll include my slide deck later, so you can kind of go back to the questions that you might be considering. But some high level stuff to start thinking about is, in general, a skills gap analysis. Are there things that would really help make you marketable in fields you're interested in that you need to be considering right now? Informational interviews, as well as job postings themselves. Go to the postings, see what's being asked for right now in industry, and do that skills gap analysis. Is there something you can use your time right now to take a Coursera course? Like in industry, that's the thing that it's kind of good news in industry. Academia, you know, they want these, oftentimes it seems like you have to get a new degree for something, or you have to take these very expensive, time-intensive courses to learn skills in academia. And that's the only thing that is seen as relevant or reliable. But what I would say about industry is they are primarily concerned with, can you do this work? Can you go on LinkedIn Learning, take a few-hour course, you get the basics, you all are intelligent people, you have had for a number of years had to go through the process of teaching yourself a lot of different things to get your work done in this realm. You can do the same thing. You can pick up knowledge bases, skill sets quickly from these sources. And that's kind of the direction that education is going right now, especially in relation to work-related skills, is get the basics from an online course and then put it into practice in a role. So oftentimes it's a familiarity that job postings are looking for. You know, are you able to use this? Is there a new, you know, you can learn languages or, you know, coding languages or whatever on that's a dumb example, because there's a lot more you can learn on different online learning platforms right now that you can take advantage of and fill these skills gaps rather quickly. It could be something you could do in a day, in a few hours, or a number of weeks that really helps to ramp up your marketability. But before you go and jump into all that new learning, you really need to understand what's really going to make you marketable. So going to those job postings, going to those arranging those informational interviews to really get an idea of what is worth your time to beef up on, that's something that is definitely worth putting into your overall strategy right now. Okay, so some questions for you to consider along the way, and a reminder that these are ideas and rules that I'm providing for you, but it is ultimately your individual path. And so learn the basics from me, learn the framework that you need to work within, and then do it the way that works for you. Okay, now I'm going to go to our questions from the chat. Looking to transition from a PhD in microbiology to biotech, or anything industry that would take advantage of my training. Okay, great question. I think in terms of our broad audience right now, let's talk about that individually. So Jesse, shoot me an email. It's Alaina, ALAINA .Nickerson, NICKERSON @colorado.edu. Probably didn't get that. That was really fast, but you can find me on the Career Services website, which is colorado.edu/career. What employers see as strengths and weaknesses of folks who have been to or are fresh out of grad school. So they see as strengths in you an ability to problem solve, usually a great ability to communicate, an expertise in a particular field, an ability to teach yourself different skill sets. They know all of those are, and they recognize the intelligence, the general intelligence you bring with a grad degree. Some of the maybe questions they have is an ability to work quickly. Sometimes that's a question they have because they know that academia just moves at a snail's pace. So you want to make sure you communicate, being able to meet deadlines and organize work and deliver on projects, those types of things. So there is this stereotype that we're all very theoretical in academia, and we don't necessarily deliver within a timeline that's relevant in industry. So that's something within your application and within your interviews. You want to make sure that you make it clear that you are detail oriented and that you can deliver. So that's one strategy to kind of combat one of those stereotypes. There aren't many negative stereotypes. One other thing I would address in that is this assumption that because you have a grad degree, you want to get paid a lot more than they might be able to pay. So that's important to do some research around realistic salaries. When you are negotiating, very quick side note on negotiation is your negotiation should be based not on I bring this grad degree, because for most industry roles, sometimes master's more often, but rarely are you going to find a PhD required for industry roles unless it's more in a research realm. So that is not necessarily your negotiating tool. What you might leverage in setting a salary is the oh God, that's getting into a whole other topic. But basically, the point is you want to sell yourself based on your skill sets that you bring, your maybe perhaps connections you bring, your experience that your grad degree has taught you. So sometimes the stereotype is just because you have a grad degree, you assume that you deserve to get paid more just because you have that grad degree. Move away from that and more to what has your grad degree allowed you to get in terms of skill sets and experience that can be going over and above what's being asked for in a job posting. And that will help you bring that conversation back to things that they are willing to pay more for. that's also something that you can kind of address in an application, in a cover letter. Make sure that you are making it clear that you're interested in a role because of how it is engaging your interests and skill sets in a particular way, and make sure they know that you would be engaged with that particular role rather than using this role as a stepping stone. So those are some ways to kind of combat some of those stereotypes there. But most of all, they recognize that you are bringing a self-sufficiency to a role that they may not expect in an undergrad. Okay, so getting to some other questions here. Let me check our time. We are right at 1:30. So I appreciate your time, and if you need to get going, you can. I'll stick around for a few more minutes and answer some of these other questions here. How to figure out the different options available to someone in my particular field. Like, are there field-specific resources? That's something, again, connect with us individually. We have Zoom advising appointments Monday through Friday. We have drop-ins Monday through Friday. We have online resources. So to find specifics for your field, it's, we are dealing with 54 different departments. So I don't have resources in this particular workshop for that, but I'm happy to help you find those. What else here? Private industry versus not-for-profit public service industry jobs. Yeah, that's kind of been woven throughout. How do I know if I need a PhD or if a PhD will be more prohibitive to getting hired than a master's? So, okay, in this field is engineering R&D related. R&D, PhDs are marketable. That is definitely one of those sectors that is, or types of roles that PhDs are always marketable for. Because they know you have a number of years of experience doing research. Roles will tend to, if a PhD is, most of the time PhDs are not prohibitive. The thing that becomes prohibitive about a higher degree is if you are expecting an employer to make the connection about how your degree can be leveraged in a role that is not asking for your degree. You have to do that for the employer. So you bring the idea about how you can fill this need, or you build that bridge between those two things instead of expecting the employer to do that for you. I would also say focusing on that deliverable would be important. Kind of coming back to some of those stereotypes, because most of this stuff is just based on stereotypes. It's not something that is actually reality. You just have to, the key there is to understand the needs of the employer and speak to those, meaning tailor your documents. Don't send them a CV and expect them to draw those conclusions for you. Send them a tailored resume addressing what they need in the role in the way that it's been described in the posting. And that's going to take you, that's the strategy for getting around, whether or not your degree matches what they're asking for. Now that works for, coming from a degree that's higher than what they're asking for. If they have a minimum of a grad degree, well, you all have grad degrees, so that I won't even waste time on that. Let's look at some other questions. I work on environmental issues in history. If I were to transfer to industry, I want to be doing work that had an impact, putting my background in education to work to make change. Any tips for looking out for high impact jobs to apply high levels of education? So high impact jobs, so where I see that most in industry, so we have our nonprofits. Our nonprofits tend to have some of those high impact roles. They're going to be primarily in administration, less in kind of boots on the ground types of roles. Those are going to be more entry level roles. I also see that a lot in these, actually the federal government and, you know, or different foundations have a lot of fellowships that can be interesting to look at. And I'm blanking on the name. I have one for both kind of social sciences and humanities. And then obviously we have like NSF, NIH sort of stuff for STEM areas. I'm going to get you the social sciences and humanities one. Oh man, it's on the tip of my tongue. But I'd be looking for fellowships actually. That's, you know, those are going to be the things that are requiring a higher level degree for that type of work, and policy work is a big one that requires a higher degree for that. And I would also say we could do some other brainstorming in an individual session if you want to talk further about that. How to convey your work as highly interdisciplinary and not limited to what your PhD field is. Actually, your PhD field, managers in industry care a lot less about that, what your particular field is. Now, with the caveat that, you know, if you're going into R&D or you're going into something that's really, really relevant to your role, which with this question, I wouldn't assume you're looking at things like that. When the element of interdisciplinarity of your role, that the key there is the collaboration and communication it takes, and the finding patterns and tying together seemingly disparate information. I think those are the things that you really need to key on in terms of selling an interdisciplinary degree. And again, what your degree in is a lot less necessary to really key on in industry than it is in academia. How do you find what job titles you should be searching for in different industries? Great question. This totally depends on companies, what they want to call a role. A tip I have for that is to do a job search on LinkedIn based on skill set. You can do that. You can search for jobs based on a particular skill set you want to be using. And sometimes that will help you find some of those roles that you may not intuitively know what they're calling them. Another thing to do is to find a role that you have identified. This is kind of along the lines of what you're looking for. Look for some of the skill sets they're asking for in those postings, and then do a search based on those skill sets and see what else people are calling that. I've done this with a couple different fields, with policy, with curriculum design, and I can tell you the role is called something different in almost every single company. So it's less about what the role is called and more about figuring out the wording people are using. It's a little bit of it's trial and error, but I would say it takes me a half an hour to get a good list of 20 different titles that you may be searching based on that. So it is something you have to put a little bit of time into, but it's just playing around with it. The other thing I would say in terms of a tip for that is when you build out your LinkedIn profile and you get really specific about what your experience is, what you get passionate about in your summary statement, you know, what you want to be doing in industry, and you start a job search, like start job alerts and things like that in LinkedIn, the more robust your own profile is, the better their algorithms work for finding roles that are applicable to you. And as you look at specific roles, it learns more and more what you're interested in. So if you put that information out there and start to play around in that, you're going to get better and better suggestions, and you're going to start to get a sense for what those roles are called. So start by building your profile, and I think that can be a good head start for you. I've lost all value for a bachelor's degree. I'd like to know what people are thinking when they see degrees anymore. I would like to know more about English degrees being only meant for teaching these days. Okay. So, what people are thinking when they see degrees anymore. I wish I could tell you. I really think that depends on the hiring manager, really. So let me try to get out of the screen share for a second and try to interact more with you guys. Okay. So in terms of what people think when they see degrees, that's that, like I said, it's an individual thing. It's more about how you yourself are talking about your experience. The important thing is to not rely on what somebody else is going to interpret based on your education. You have to tell that story. You have to set the frame or the lens through which somebody sees the value you bring. And they do allow you to do that within your application documents, and they expect you to be doing that. So part of it is skill in how you talk about your experience and how you tie it to what you're wanting to do later. And I'd love to talk about that more specifically, Alan, if you have, if you want to schedule an individual session. Let me look at, I'm just scanning through the other comments. Okay. What does it mean if fast pace burns you out and slow pace feels mechanical? Many employers seem to assume that people have one personality or the other. I think the important thing there is to identify, to know for yourself what that is. I think it's dangerous to assume that employers are thinking one way or another about that. I think if they really key in on it matters how they're describing their company. If somebody in industry is saying you must be comfortable in a fast-paced environment, then that means they are really fast-paced. That the rate of change is quick, that you need to be adaptable for things like that. I think a lot of that probably is going to be, rather than me try to guess what employers are thinking or what they are, what they're valuing, the important thing to do there is to have an informational interview with somebody who's working for a particular company and see how they can describe that, and be honest with yourself about if that's going to match you or not. Other questions? How long after graduating do we have access to LinkedIn Learning? I think as long as you can sign in with as long as you have your colorado.edu account, then that should allow you access to that. Job markets. What are your thoughts about traveling for work versus local opportunities? The stereotype is you need to go live in the poor neighborhood, making it. The stereotype is that you have to go live in the poor neighborhood, making it, or terribly suffering, which is what I've found to be true thus far. Job markets, what are your thoughts about? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding that question. Traveling for work versus local opportunities. Obviously, if you have a larger region you're willing to consider, then you have more opportunity there. You have to really work within your local markets if you're going to limit that. So you have to be more willing to kind of flex in what you're doing for work if you're really specific about the region you're working in. I don't know about the poor neighborhood and making it comment. Hopefully you specified or clarified that down below. Where would the slide deck be? The slide deck will be in the email that I send those of you who signed into this. There are books made for that too. I found one for jobs in my field. It was literally titled that way. Okay, that was a comment to everyone. If they say you must be comfortable in a fast-paced environment, that means it's really quick. That helped. I work in media, if that adds context. Jobs simply aren't around in some areas. Not okay. Comfortable and fast. Okay. Anybody else have any questions as we wrap up here? Jobs simply aren't around in some areas. Yeah, and there is this final comment. Jobs simply aren't around in some areas. That may be true, and I think that's why it's important to be really to understand yourself and to have some different options you're looking at for yourself, and that's part of considering what the market is doing right now. So instead of being really rigid in the one thing you're looking for, have several options that you've kind of vetted about what you want from for your life and with your skills, and that can help you be able to be more resilient in the ebbs and flows of the market. Okay, I think I'll wrap up now. It looks like people are needing to get going, and so, but please feel free to reach out to me with individual questions. And thank you so much for being here today. And we'll be sending out that email later on in the next couple days with those resources. Okay, thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.